Lecture 5, Part 2. Interactions between EM energy and surfaces. Spectral signatures. 1. Spectral signatures, of fundamental importance for remote sensing, are the representation of reflectivity variation as a function of the wavelength of the reflected electromagnetic energy for homogeneous surfaces. As an example, the following figure shows the spectral signature of some types of surfaces. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 1. Among the most recognizable environmental categories in remote sensing, water and its solid states play a special role, this on the basis of their specific behavior which, in the different parts of the spectrum, generally contrasts with the other elements of the landscape. When observed in small quantities, pure water is a substantially colorless element, which justifies its very low reflectivity and high visible transmissivity. In the observation of a water body, it is necessary to consider the different contributions that make up the outgoing radiance. In fact, ESON direct solar irradiance, together with the diffuse one due to the ESCI, in the impact of a water surface, breaks down according to different interaction mechanisms. A scheme of such interactions is represented in a simple manner in the following figure. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 2. Omitting the dependence on the angles of illumination and observation, the radiance L, lambda, observed and acquired by an instrument that detects a surface of water is composed of four main components defined in the following equation. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 3. Latm, lambda, is the fraction of radiance that cannot reach the water body and is reflected by the atmosphere interposed between the sensor and the water surface. In the case of large distances, as can be from an airplane or satellite, this quantity can be much greater than that of interest I water, lambda, as shown in the following figure. ISER, lambda, is the fraction of radiance reflected by the water surface and which cannot penetrate the water body. It is therefore the component most closely linked to light diffused by the sky. I water, lambda, is the fraction of reflected radiance that penetrate the water body without being able to reach the bottom. This is the component of greatest interest in the study of water because it is directly linked to the first thickness of the water column and to the processes of absorption and diffusion of irradiance in the volume of water. ISEBD, lambda, is the fraction of radiance that has managed to penetrate the water body, reaches its bottom and re-emerges. Its contribution depends on the transmissivity coefficient of the water and its thickness. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 4. In any case, the components of the previous equation different from I water, lambda, the most important information needed, turn out to be a disturbance and undesired. The most arduous task of aquatic remote sensing lies precisely in isolating the radiance of interest from these components. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 5. The portion of energy reflected by the water, when it is pure, can reach a maximum of 3% of the incident radiant flux and is confined mostly to the bands of blue-green light from where a continuous decreasing is observed going towards the lengths of longer waves, until completely absorbed, already from near-infrared, previous figure. The color of the water, therefore, is not an intrinsic property but depends almost exclusively on the influence of the surrounding environment, such as the color of the sky or that of the seabed, and the result of the diffusion caused by the presence of compounds such as phytoplankton, the suspended sediment, the organic component or other substances. Spectral signatures: water, snow, ice. 6. Snow and ice represent the solid state of water and their high reflectivity value is one of the most important features in Earth observation. The snowpack is made up of a series of superimposed layers of snow, snowfall or wind deposits, that have different physical and mechanical characteristics depending on their state of metamorphism. In the case of dry snow, snow temperature 0 degrees C, the evolutionary processes of the snowpack can lead to the rounding or the faceting of the crystals. When, on the other hand, due to heating, the snowpack increases the snow temperature up to 0 degrees Celsius, the fusion processes that take place lead to the formation of wet crystals. The optical properties of the snow cover in the visible and near-infrared depend on some specific factors of the composition and structure of the snow and its metamorphism phase. Among these, the size of the crystals, the thickness of the mantle, the density, the presence of impurities and the content in water. The reflectance of the fresh snow is very high in the visible and in the near-infrared and decreases strongly in the medium infrared, giving rise to well-distinguishable absorption structures at wavelengths greater than 1 m and in correspondence with the water absorption bands at 1.4, 1.9 and 2.6 m, following figure. Spectral signatures, soils and rocks. 1. Soil, especially in the higher horizons, can be seen as the residual product of the transformation of the underlying mother rock. In favorable exposure conditions, i.e. with no or very small vegetation cover, the reflectivity curves of the different soil types offer important information on their characteristics such as concentration in iron oxides, the moisture content, which is linked to the granulometry and therefore the porosity, the presence of organic elements. In the first case, with the increase in the concentration of oxides, there is a chromatic shift towards red-orange, due to the absorption of blue-green radiations by the granules and spheres of which an oxidized soil is composed. This is the case of lateritic soils present in the tropical belts and in a hot humid climate. The presence of the other two components, i.e. the moisture content and organic matter, in most cases, lowers the value of the spectral reflectance, which in the visible corresponds to a tendency towards dark tones, figure below. Spectral signatures, soils and rocks. 3. Furthermore, there is a sudden bending of the reflectivity curve, in correspondence of the three water absorption bands, centered at 1.4, 1.9 and 2.6 m of wavelength, bending which is naturally proportional to the moisture content of the soil. Therefore a multispectral analysis in these bands, compared to the contiguous ones, is an excellent tool for investigating the subject. In fact, the soils, being the result of the transformation processes of the underlying mother rock due to the combined effects of atmospheric agents and biosphere activity, can show very specific spectral responses as a result of the combination of a certain number of elements that compose them: minerals, matrix, iron oxides, organic material and water. Although the reflectivity of soils can vary in a fairly wide range, a series of measurements made on 240 types of soils has shown how their general shape is maintained. Spectral signatures, soils and rocks. 4. Compared to those of soils, the spectral reflectivity curves of the rocks, being composed of different minerals and with very variable structures, are less generalized and, consequently, of more difficult interpretation. In fact, there are multiple combinations of curves depending on the various parameters and aspects that can be considered, from the color to the type of rocks, from the structure to the mineral content, etc. For example, two families of granites can be distinguished spectrally based on their different structure rather than on their different color, to which the silica content is bound and, for this same parameter, not in all wavelengths. Or other remotely detectable physical quantities can be discriminating, such as thermal inertia or thermal constraint, according to which a rock cools and therefore also typically heats up. Spectral signatures, soils and rocks. 6. The thermal capacity and thermal inertia are among the distinctive features often used for the realization of classifiers in remote sensing for the distinction of soils and rocky lithotypes. In the first case, the granulometry and their matrix clearly regulate the emissivity, highlighting in the medium infrared band 3 to 5 m a clear distinction between sandy and silty soils, while in the rest of the thermal infrared range the soil silty shows the same trend as the sandy one. The soils with the same silty matrix differ instead, albeit in light form, from the clay in the 8 to 10 m band, following figure. Spectral signatures, vegetation. 1. Spectral reflectance curve of vegetation is frequently indicated in remote sensing as the spectral signature par excellence. Its shape, in the different wavelength, depends by the different factors analyzed below. Leaf pigments. The portion of energy reflected in the visible, VIS, field is related to the presence of leaf pigments such as chlorophyll, xanthophyll and carotene. Chlorophyll in particular, 65% of pigments, is responsible for the two absorption bands in blue, 0.45 m, and in red, 0.66 m, and the maximum relative reflectivity in green, 0.50 m, according to which the plant world. This effect is due in particular to chloroplasts which contain granules where the different types of chlorophyll are located. Carotenes, on the other hand, impart those yellow-orange tones to poor or chlorophyll-free leaves. Spectral signatures, vegetation, 2. Leaf structure. It is responsible for the spectral behavior in the near-infrared bands, NIR, between 0.70 and 1.35 m. By leaf structure, in this context we mean the spatial organization of leaf cells with reference to its morphological evidence which varies from one species to another. Infrared radiation does not interact with chloroplasts but is greatly influenced by the structure of the leaf, which causes a very high reflection, of the order of 30 to 70%, of the incident energy. The portion of residual energy is mainly transmitted, that is very little. In fact, on the one hand the foliar pigments and the cellulose that constitutes the cell walls are transparent, and on the other the water contained in the leaf has weak absorption phenomena, less than 10%. At the beginning of the NIR interval the reflectivity passes so abruptly from a few percentage points to values close to 50%, with a steep gradient around 0.8 m. The level of the reflectivity plateau is higher the more the tissue is made up of cells with irregular shapes and heterogeneous content. The reflectivity and the transmissivity have similar values with a certain prevalence of the reflectivity, which can reach the limit value of 80% as in the case of the olive tree. This phenomenon, in remote sensing, is of essential importance because it is the basis of the most significant analysis possibilities of the plant world, whereas the study of reflection in the NIR becomes a powerful investigation tool, both to discriminate different species and to analyze the evolutionary stages and to determine possible pathologies within the same community. Spectral signatures, vegetation, 3. Water content. In the shortwave infrared domain, SWIR, between 1.35 and 2.70 m, the spectral properties of vegetation strictly depend on the water content in the leaf where, as we have seen, at 1.4 m, 1.9 m and 2.6 m we have intense phenomena of absorption of radiation by water, while also the relative maximums of reflection at 1.65 m and 2.2 m are partially influenced by the water content of the leaves. In this way, the absorption wavelengths, as for soils, can become diagnostic with respect to the water stress of the plants. In the following 2 slides, vegetation spectral signatures. Spectral signatures, vegetation, 6. From the emissive point of view, the vegetation behaves very differently depending on the water content, as demonstrated in the examples. From the diagrams, the emissivity trend of a grass lawn in vegetative conditions could be assimilated to a black body with values close to unity over the entire spectral range of the medium and thermal infrared, from 3 to 14 m. Instead, clearly differentiated behaviors occur in the 2 medium wave, MWIR, and thermal, TLR, infrared windows.